Hello and welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be going over the top 10 most fun driller overclocks, at least in my opinion. There is a lot of very fun overclocks for each class, and fun is very subjective, so if these aren't your top 10 favorite, tell me what yours are. I would really like to hear, or just some of your most favorite overclocks, as well as none of these are in a particular order. So first up is Persistent Plasma with the EPC. This is one of my favorite overclocks for the EPC. What this allows you to do is whenever you fire out a charge shot and it hits something, it then spreads plasma out. So you get a big plasma ball. It actually covers a pretty big area, slows down all enemies and deals damage to them over time, as well as this does technically lessen the amount of damage that the EPC has, but that usually doesn't matter with this particular overclock because you just get more damage from the plasma itself. And setting up a whole bunch of these balls of plasma is really cool. I also just really like the effect when you have the EPC set up for mining. So this way you're still mining out these big areas of the cave, and you're also leaving behind this plasma trail, which is really useful for slowing down enemies that might be walking through it or killing smaller enemies like swarmers. At our number 9 spot, we have AG Mixture for the Sludge Pump. This one is a very simple but a very fun overclock. This just makes it so your sludge is less affected by gravity. So you can shoot your sludge shots a lot further, a lot faster, and a lot straighter than you otherwise would. This goes for regular shots as well as charge shots. This doesn't come at any sort of downside other than, I guess, the trajectory changing with the sludge pump, which if you get used to the regular sludge pump, that might be a little bit of a downside. But this does allow you to snipe enemies quite a ways away with the sludge pump, and it's super fun to be picking off very long-range enemies like the web spitters or the acid spitters with this, as well as it's just very useful for firing this at long range into crowds with your charged up shots. It makes it even more fun if you end up taking the increased velocity in Tier 1 with the sludge pump. That way they're just flying out super fast and super far away. Coming in at number 8, we have Gamma Contamination. This one is a microwave gun overclock, and the microwave guns overclocks are pretty fun, but they're usually very fun in combination with something else. This one is pretty fun by itself, since you can put radiation on an enemy, it'll start glowing, it will take damage over time. Actually a pretty decent amount of damage over time. It takes like 22 damage a tick, and it lasts for quite a while, as well as it kind of hits every other enemy around it too, which is kind of cool. And it's really great if you want to put every status effect that you can onto a single enemy, which is mainly the reason why I like taking it with this one, because I can just see all the status effects just line up on it, on something, where it's taking radiation, it's taking the sludge damage, it's probably on fire from the sludge as well, and it's also taking the radiation damage as well as the neurotoxin damage. Maybe I said radiation damage there twice. Either way, it's worth saying a second time. Coming in at number 7, we have Blistering Necrosis. This is another microwave gun overclock, and this one is also another really good overclock just by itself. What this one allows you to do is put blisters onto enemies, and once these blisters are popped, then they deal extra damage to that enemy. This can be really, really good against large enemies. It can be actually insane if you want to combine this with Ice Spear from the cryo cannon and you put a blister on something and then you shoot it with the Ice Spear. It's very difficult to pull off, but it does massive damage, and with that you can actually one-shot the twins, at least one of them with it. It's pretty funny when you actually pull that off. But even beyond that, it's very good for just using on regular enemies, just grunt swarms. You can shoot this into there, put a couple blisters on enemies. Once they pop, if you have something like Boiler Array also on your microwave gun, you can trigger this to do massive damage to everything around it, and it pairs well with any of your primary weapons, which is really awesome. Of course, you could always run this with something like a thermal shock build, because microwave gun works really well with that build too. Coming in at number 6, we have Heat Pipe. This is a personal favorite of mine, although it is a very, very difficult overclock to get used to. What Heat Pipe does is allows the EPC to use charge shots that are more effective. However, they charge much faster than they otherwise would, and it's far, far easier to overheat your EPC. This one is very difficult to use, but it is a very good overclock once you get the timing down and you're just using this for like EPC mining. It can be useful in combat, although it's very tricky to use because you're paying attention to enemies, you're paying attention to where you're shooting, you're also paying attention to when you have to shoot your shot a second time to get the actual thin containment field to rupture, and you're also juggling the heat meter on your EPC, and you can't use this in quick succession. If you use one charge shot and you forget to shoot it or whatever, you can't do another charge shot immediately afterwards because you will overheat your EPC. So there's a lot of stuff to keep in mind when using this overclock, but it is very satisfying to actually use. Coming in at number 5, we have Snowball, and Snowball got changed, which is pretty cool. What Snowball allows you to do is fire out a snowball from your cryo cannon. To do this, you have to hit your reload button. Once you hit it, it takes a second to charge up, and then it fires out the snowball. It will also overheat your cryo cannon when you do this. You can't use it immediately afterwards. The snowball acts very much like a cryo grenade from Scout. This can freeze large groups of enemies, as well as it can be pretty good for freezing larger enemies like breeders. You usually have to spray the cryo cannon at them first and then shoot this on there, as well as it does have a new effect since it got buffed, where it has a lingering cold effect, so it keeps freezing over time. I think it's for 6 or 8 seconds. This lingers for quite a while, and it can be very useful for freezing large groups of enemies. It's also very useful if you wait until the end of your cryo cannon spray when you're just about to overheat it to fire out your snowball. That way you can get the most amount of effect out of your cryo cannon, assuming you have teammates or yourself to follow it up with. Very fun overclock, and it's really good against hordes. At number 5, we have Ice Spear. This is another very fun overclock for the cryo cannon, and works very similar to Snowball. In order to use this, you have to hit your reload button. Once you do, it takes a second for the cryo cannon to charge up, and this fires out an Ice Spear that does massive damage to the first thing that it hits. You can actually one-shot menaces with this on any difficulty, which is super useful, because they are a very annoying enemy for Driller to deal with. This just lets you delete them. It also lets you hit big enemies very hard. And if you can get the timing right between the freezing and firing this, you can actually freeze an enemy like a Dreadnought completely and then fire an Ice Spear right as you freeze it so that you deal massive damage to it, because it doesn't matter where you hit it with the Ice Spear once it's frozen. So that is another very fun strategy to work out with this particular overclock. Coming in at number 3, we have Facemelter for the flamethrower. This one is a very basic overclock, but it's a very fun one. You do very high damage very close with the flamethrower. It does limit the range of the flamethrower, but that's usually okay so long as you get right up next to something. You can torch things very, very fast with this. It was kind of a toss-up between this one and the full reach flamethrower or even sticky feel for me, although a lot of the flamethrower overclocks are kind of basic. This one is probably one of my favorite though, just to get right up next to something and torch it until it's dead. Very, very simple overclock, but a very satisfying overclock to use too. At number 2, we have Automatic Fire for the Sabata. Another very simple overclock where it just turns your regular pistol into a machine gun pistol. Does have more recoil, does have more spread. Doesn't really matter though when you can just empty this into bugs at close to medium range and do pretty decent damage with it. It's also kind of bugged right now with a 2-round burst fire, where I think it fires out 2 rounds every time you shoot it, but it only consumes 1 ammo. Don't know why that is. I don't know if it really matters, because I usually take recoil reduction and weak spot damage with this one, but it is something that you can do with the Sabata, which is pretty cool. And then number 1, we've got the Sludge Blast for the Sludge Pump. This one can turn your Sludge Pump into a shotgun, well, at least the charged shot of it. The regular Sludge Pump shots are going to be the same, but now your charged up shots don't fire out into a goo ball that then spreads to other enemies. This one just fires out like an acid shotgun straight at any enemy that's right in front of you. And this does a ton of damage per second, a ton of damage on hit. It's very good for burst damage. It's also pretty good at taking out long-range enemies like Spitballers or MacTerra groups if you get decent spread. That's kind of another problem, is it does become a shotgun, so your spread can matter quite a bit, where sometimes it'll just go wide and not hit a whole lot. If you're using it close to medium range, though, it is very effective, and it can just shred through big things like Oppressors and Praetorians, as well as Dreadnoughts without very much trouble. So these are my 10 most fun overclocks for Driller. Tell me what your 10 are. I'd really like to hear that down in the comments below. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you guys next time. Bye-bye!